My toxic sister tried to steal my wedding day with her baby shower. She thought she'd win, but ended up alone. The day James proposed was the first time in years I felt like the main character in my own life story. Growing up as Sophia Carter, younger sister to Nicole Carter, meant living in a perpetual shadow. Nicole was the valedictorian, the homecoming queen, the daughter who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes, especially our father's. I was always Nicole's little sister, or the other Carter girl. Never just Sophia. When Dad passed away from a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, something shifted in Nicole. The grief transformed her, but not in a way it changed the rest of us. While Mom retreated into quiet mourning and I threw myself into my work as a kindergarten teacher, Nicole stepped into what she considered a void in our family hierarchy. Without Dad's authoritative presence, she appointed herself the new decision-maker, the self-declared matriarch of the Carter family. "Someone needs to keep this family together," she would say, usually right before dictating how Mom should manage her finances, or suggesting I should reconsider my modest career choice. At 32, Nicole had it all: the executive position at a marketing firm, the sprawling colonial house in the suburbs, and now, a 4-month baby bump with her husband Derek. Meanwhile, at 28, I had finally found something that was wholly mine, James. We met at a grief support group 18 months after Dad died. James had lost his mother to cancer around the same time. There is something comforting about finding someone who understood that grief doesn't travel in a straight line. It circles back when you least expect it. "You have the same smile as your profile picture," were his first words to me, delivered with a coffee stain spreading across his blue button-down shirt. "Most people don't, you know." Our relationship evolved slowly, authentically. He was a middle school history teacher who quoted obscure historical figures and collected vintage maps. He made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how, and for the first time, I felt seen for exactly who I was. When he proposed on a random Thursday evening while we were making dinner in my apartment kitchen, there was no elaborate setup, just an honest question and a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I don't need a big moment," he said, kneeling between the refrigerator and the counter. "I just need you, Sophia. Every day, for the rest of our lives." I said yes before he could even finish the question. The next day, I called Mom first. Her teary congratulations made my heart swell with joy. Then, knowing I couldn't put it off, I drove to Nicole's house to share the news in person. Nicole opened the door wearing a crisp white blouse that accentuated her growing belly, her sleek blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. I always felt slightly disheveled around her, even though I'd made an effort that day, wearing my best jeans and the emerald green sweater that matched my new ring. "I have some news," I said, unable to contain my smile as we sat in her pristine living room. I extended my left hand, the emerald catching the light streaming through her floor-to-ceiling windows. Nicole's expression flickered, surprise, something that might have been happiness, and then a calculating look I'd seen many times before. "Oh, how quaint," she said, taking my hand to examine the ring more closely. "Vintage, isn't it? James has always struck me as the sentimental type." I pulled my hand back, the joy dimming slightly. "We're thinking of getting married next spring. April 15th. It's when the cherry blossoms will be in full bloom at Riverside Park." That's when it happened. Nicole's perfectly manicured mask slipped, revealing something cold underneath. She placed a protective hand over her belly and leaned forward. "April 15th? You're not seriously thinking of doing this without asking the family first, right?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were hard. "You know I'll be 7 months pregnant by then. And Mom will be just back from her cruise with the church group. Not to mention April is always so busy with tax season for Derek." I blinked, confused. I didn't realize I needed to submit my wedding date for family approval. "Don't be dramatic, Sophia. I'm just saying a little consideration would be nice. After all, this is a family event, and someone needs to think about the logistics." She gestured vaguely around the room. "That's usually my department since Dad passed." The familiar feeling of being diminished crept over me, the subtle way Nicole had always made me feel like my existence was secondary to hers. But this time, Something different stirred within me. This was my engagement, my wedding, my future. The date is set, Nicole. James and I have already put down deposits. A small lie. We hadn't put down any deposits yet, but I suddenly felt the need to establish a boundary with my sister. Nicole's smile tightened. Well, if you're sure. I just hope you won't regret rushing into things. Marriage is a big commitment, you know. It's not like those little art projects you do with your kindergartners. I stood up, recognizing the dig for what it was. We're not rushing. We love each other. That's enough. As I turned to leave, Nicole called after me, her voice honey-sweet again. Let's have lunch next week. We can talk more about your plans. And I can show you the nursery designs Derek and I have been working on for little Thomas Alexander Cartwright. Walking to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in Nicole's eyes had looked almost predatory when I'd mentioned the wedding date. It was the same look she used to get as children when I had something she wanted, a toy, a friend's attention, a piece of cake. But this time, what I had was happiness. Pure, uncomplicated happiness with James. And for some reason, that seemed to bother Nicole more than anything else. What I didn't know then was that Nicole's reaction wasn't just about her usual need to control or overshadow me. That first dig about the wedding date was merely the opening move in a game I didn't yet know we were playing, a game where Nicole was willing to risk everything to maintain her position at the center of our family's universe. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of wedding planning. James and I had secured our dream venue at Riverside Park, found a photographer whose portfolio made me tear up, and I'd even said yes to a dress, an elegant A-line with delicate lace detailing that made me feel like I was floating when I wore it. For once, everything was falling perfectly into place. Then came the text from Nicole. Coffee at my place tomorrow? 2 p.m. Important family matter to discuss. I should have known something was wrong from the formality of the message. Nicole never asked, she summoned. And she never used the phrase family matter unless she was planning to assert her self-proclaimed authority. Still, I went. Part of me hoped we could mend whatever invisible thread had frayed between us since my engagement announcement. Maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch, perhaps even offering to help with the wedding. I arrived at her house exactly at 2, carrying a box of her favorite macarons as a peace offering. Derek opened the door, his expression oddly stiff. She's in the study, he said, taking the box without thanks. Been on the phone all morning with people. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, whatever she says, just remember she's pregnant. Hormones and all that. Before I could ask what he meant, Nicole appeared in the hallway, one hand resting on her now visible baby bump, the other holding a manila folder. Right on time, she said, as if my punctuality surprised her. Come in. I followed her into the study, Dad's old home office that she'd claimed after his death. She'd redecorated it, of course, replacing his weathered leather chair and crowded bookshelves with a sleek glass desk and minimalist art. But she'd kept his antique grandfather clock, which ticked ominously in the corner as I took a seat across from her. Tea? She offered, already pouring without waiting for my answer. I got that fancy herbal blend you like. The gesture would have seemed kind if not for the calculating look in her eyes. Nicole never remembered my preferences unless it served a purpose. Thanks, I said cautiously. Derek mentioned you wanted to discuss something important. Nicole took her time stirring honey into her own cup, the silver spoon clinking against fine china. Yes, well, there's no easy way to say this, so I'll be direct. She set down her spoon and folded her hands over the manila folder. I need you to postpone your wedding. I nearly choked on my tea. What? Why would I? I'm planning my baby shower that weekend, she interrupted smoothly. The 15th to be exact. I've already sent out save the dates to the family. The room seemed to tilt sideways. You scheduled your baby shower on my wedding day? After I specifically told you. It's the only weekend that works for everyone, she said, shrugging as if this were a minor scheduling conflict and not a deliberate act of sabotage. Aunt Meredith will be in town from Seattle. Uncle Robert can take time off work, and Mom's church trip ends that Friday. Those are all the people coming to my wedding, I said, feeling heat rise to my face. You knew that. Nicole's expression hardened, the pretense of sisterly concern slipping away. Look, I didn't want to get into this, but since you're being difficult, baby showers take precedence over weddings. This is the first grandchild in the family, Sophia. The continuation of Dad's legacy. And my marriage isn't important? I asked, stunned by her audacity. I'm not saying that, she replied with exaggerated patience. I'm just saying your wedding can happen anytime. My baby shower needs to happen before Thomas arrives. Surely you can understand that. I set down my teacup before I gave in to the urge to throw it. I'm not changing my date, Nicole. You knew exactly what you were doing. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. She opened the manila folder and slid a document across the desk. I was hoping you'd be reasonable, but since you're not. The paper was a copy of Dad's trust agreement, the family trust he'd established years ago with Nicole as the trustee. I'd known about it vaguely, but had never seen the details. Turn to page 8, she instructed, her voice glacial. My fingers shook as I flipped the pages. There, highlighted in yellow, was a clause about the distribution of assets. You see, Nicole continued, as trustee, I have significant discretion over how Dad's inheritance is distributed. Most of it's under my name, technically held in trust, but legally, well, let's just say I make the decisions. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured finger tapping on the document. If you don't play nice, I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. The threat hung in the air between us, clear and unmistakable. You're blackmailing me? I whispered. Over a wedding date. Nicole's smile didn't reach her eyes. I prefer to think of it as incentivizing family harmony. Dad always wanted us to get along, remember? The grandfather clock chimed twice, marking the hour and seemingly the end of the conversation in Nicole's mind. She closed the folder and stood up. Think it over, she said, smoothing her blouse over her baby bump. Family first, right? That's what Dad always said. I walked out of her house in a daze, clutching the copy of the trust agreement she generously allowed me to keep. The April sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the darkness that had just unfolded. In my car, I finally allowed the tears to come, not just for the wedding date or the money, but for the realization that my sister, my own flesh and blood, was willing to use our father's death and his legacy as a weapon against me. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly suspect, was that Dad had pulled me aside before he passed and shared something in confidence. Something that would change everything. But for now, I let Nicole believe she held all the cards. After all, she'd always underestimated me. It was time she learned her mistake. 3 days after Nicole's inheritance threat, my phone pinged with a message from Aunt Madeline. My heart sank as I read it. Sweetie, I hate to do this over text, but I won't be able to make your wedding after all. Your cousin Ellie needs me that weekend, and you know how she gets.
I'm so sorry.
I'll send a nice gift. Aunt Madeline, Dad's sister, and the woman who taught me how to bake snickerdoodles and apply lipstick without smudging, was bowing out. The same aunt who had promised, teary-eyed at Dad's funeral, that she would always be there for me. I called her immediately, but the conversation only confirmed my suspicions. It's just that Nicole is due so soon after, she explained, her voice strained. The baby shower is such an important tradition, and this being the first grandchild and all. But you're my godmother, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. You've known about my wedding date for weeks. The uncomfortable silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Nicole had gotten to her. I'm sorry, honey, Aunt Madeline finally said. Family is complicated sometimes. By the end of the week, 3 more relatives had mysteriously developed scheduling conflicts. My cousin Trevor, who I'd been close with since childhood, texted that he couldn't choose sides, but felt he needed to support Nicole in her condition. The family group chat, once buzzing with excitement about my upcoming nuptials, had gone conspicuously silent. In its place, a new chat had formed, one I wasn't included in but heard about from Mom, dedicated to Nicole's baby shower planning. James found me one evening sitting on our apartment floor, surrounded by half-addressed wedding invitations, methodically crossing names off our guest list. We could just elope, he suggested gently, sliding down to sit beside me. Forget the big ceremony. Just you, me, and whoever still has the backbone to show up. I looked at him, this kind man who deserved a celebration untainted by family drama. Is that what you want? He took my hands in his. What I want is to marry you without watching you get hurt by people who should be protecting you. But I also know you, Sophia. You don't give up when something matters.
He was right.
Giving in to Nicole now would set a pattern for our entire marriage. Every holiday, every milestone, every important moment would be hers to manipulate. I couldn't let that happen. We're getting married on April 15th, I said firmly. With or without them. The next morning, Mom called asking if I could meet her for lunch. We sat at our favorite diner, the place Dad used to take us for Sunday breakfasts. She looked tired, worry lines etched deeper around her eyes than I remembered. Nicole showed me the baby's ultrasound yesterday, she said after ordering, carefully avoiding my gaze. It's a boy, just like she thought. He has your father's nose, they say. I pushed my salad around my plate. That's nice, Mom. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, I know you're upset about the baby shower situation, but Nicole is going through a lot right now. Pregnancy is stressful, and she's trying to carry on your father's legacy. Maybe you could compromise just this once? The betrayal stung worse coming from her. Compromise how exactly? Postpone my wedding so Nicole can have her party. It's not just a party, Mom countered, defensive now. It's welcoming the first grandchild of the family. Your father would have wanted. Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended. Don't tell me what Dad would have wanted. Nicole is using his memory to manipulate everyone, and you're letting her. Mom's eyes welled with tears. I'm trying to keep the peace. Since your father died, it feels like everything's falling apart. Nicole says you're being selfish. Selfish. The word hit like a slap. She scheduled her baby shower on my wedding day and threatened to cut me out of Dad's inheritance if I didn't cancel. How am I the selfish one? Mom paled. She threatened you with the inheritance? She told me you two had discussed dates and you weren't willing to budge. Of course, Nicole had spun the story. She was always careful to play the victim with just enough plausible deniability. Ask her about the trust agreement, I said, pushing away from the table. Ask her what she's holding over my head. Sophia, please, Mom pleaded. She's carrying the first grandchild of the family. Can't you see how important that is? Your wedding is just one day, but this baby is more important than my happiness? Than the start of my marriage? Is that what you're saying? The silence that followed was answer enough. I left Mom sitting there, the check unpaid, my heart hammering with a mix of hurt and growing resolve. Outside, I called James and asked him to meet me at the park. I needed fresh air, perspective, and the only person who seemed to be on my side anymore. As I waited on our usual bench by the duck pond, my phone lit up with text after text, family members suddenly concerned about my attitude, cousins suggesting I was being dramatic, even a message from Nicole herself, dripping with false sympathy. I hear you're upset about the scheduling conflict. I understand completely. When you're ready to discuss a solution that works for the family, I'm here. I felt blindsided, betrayed, and completely alone. Nicole had orchestrated a masterful campaign against me, painting herself as the reasonable one carrying the first grandchild of the family, while I was cast as the selfish sister stealing her thunder. But as I watched James walking toward me across the park, his expression shifting from concern to determined support as soon as he spotted me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't about to give in. Not yet. That night, after everyone had abandoned me, I found myself sitting on the floor of my closet, surrounded by the few possessions I had left of my father. An old fishing hat, a box of faded photographs, his favorite coffee mug with the chipped handle that Mom had tried to throw away a dozen times. And beneath it all, a small fireproof safe I hadn't opened since he died. Dad and I had always shared a different kind of bond than he had with Nicole. While he'd pushed her toward achievement and success, our connection was quieter, built on Saturday morning fishing trips and late-night conversations about books neither of us had time to read. Nicole was his legacy in the world. I was his confidant. 3 weeks before his heart gave out, Dad had called me over for what he described as a private matter. He'd looked thinner than usual, his once robust frame diminished somehow. At the time, I'd attributed it to grief over Mom's recent breast cancer scare, but looking back, I wonder if he'd known what was coming. "Sophia," he'd said, sitting me down in his study. The one Nicole had since renovated beyond recognition. "There's something I need to tell you, and I need you to keep it between us for now." He'd opened his desk drawer and withdrawn a sealed envelope. "I've changed my will," he said, his voice low. "The official one with Berkman and Associates. Not the family trust Nicole manages." I remember being confused. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't trust your sister with money." The bluntness had shocked me. Dad had always been Nicole's biggest champion. "She's brilliant at making it, terrible at valuing it properly." He handed me the envelope. "This is the contact information for Harold Berkman. He's the only one who has the updated will. In it, I've arranged for the majority of my assets to pass directly to you, but there's a contingency." "What kind of contingency?" "The funds transfer on your wedding day if you marry someone of good character." His eyes had crinkled with affection. "Someone who loves you for you, not for what they can get from you. Someone like that young man you've been seeing." "James?" I'd felt my cheeks flush. "Dad, we've only been dating a few months." "I know quality when I see it." He tapped the envelope. "But this stays between us. The family trust Nicole controls is real, but it's a fraction of what I've actually set aside. Just enough to keep her feeling important without letting her squander everything I've built." I tucked the envelope away, not fully understanding the weight of what he'd given me. 2 days later, we'd gone fishing one last time. 5 days after that, I'd stood beside his hospital bed, holding his hand as the monitors flatlined. In the chaos of grief that followed, Nicole had immediately stepped forward with the family trust documents, positioning herself as the financial authority in the family. I'd been too numb to argue, and the envelope had stayed hidden in my safe, untouched. Until tonight. With trembling fingers, I spun the combination, Dad's birthday, and lifted the lid. The envelope was there, slightly yellowed with age, but intact. Inside was a business card for Harold Berkman, attorney at law, and a handwritten note for my father. "Sophia, when the time comes, Harold will help you. The code phrase is fishing at dawn. Don't let anyone, especially your sister, make you doubt your worth. You were always my greatest joy. Love, Dad." Tears blurred my vision as I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 10:43 p.m. Too late to call a lawyer, but not too late to start fighting back. I spent the night researching inheritance law and trust management. By morning, I had a basic understanding of what I was dealing with. Nicole, as trustee of the family trust, did have significant legal power over the family trust. But if Dad had indeed created a separate will with different terms, that would supersede any trust agreements. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called Harold Berkman's office. "Berkman and Associates, how may I direct your call?" A receptionist answered. "I'd like to speak with Harold Berkman regarding my father's will," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My name is Sophia Carter. The matter involves fishing at dawn." There was a pause, followed by, "One moment please, Miss Carter." Seconds later, an older man's voice came on the line. "Sophia, I've been wondering when you might call. Your father said you would, eventually. You remember me?" "Of course. Robert spoke of you often."
His tone softened.
"I was sorry to hear of his passing. He was a good man, one of my oldest clients." "I need to know about his will," I said. "The real one. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" This isn't a conversation for the telephone. 4 hours later, I sat across from Harold Berkman, a spry man in his 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He slid a document across his desk, a legal will, dated just 1 month before Dad's death. "Your father amended his will 3 times in his final year," Berkman explained. "Each time, he increased the portion allocated to you, with specific instructions regarding its distribution." I scanned the document, my eyes widening as I reached the key provision. "Upon the marriage of my daughter, Sophia Elizabeth Carter, to a person of good character and genuine intention, as determined by my daughter alone. The sum total of my remaining estate, excluding only those portions specifically allocated to the family trust, shall transfer to her control immediately and without restriction. How much are we talking about? I asked, hardly daring to breathe. Berkman named a figure that made me grip the arms of my chair. That can't be right, I whispered. Nicole said the estate was mostly tied up in the family trust. Your sister manages approximately 18% of your father's total assets through the family trust, Berkman said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Robert was a careful man. He wanted to give Nicole enough responsibility to feel important without enough power to cause damage. I sat back, stunned. And she has no idea? None whatsoever. The terms are confidential until triggered by your marriage. As I left Berkman's office, clutching copies of the will, a strange calm settled over me. Nicole's manipulation had one fatal flaw. She had dramatically underestimated both me and our father. I hadn't told anyone about the real will. Not my mother, not James, not a single soul. And that silence was about to become my greatest advantage. April 15th arrived with perfect blue skies and cherry blossoms in full bloom, just as I'd imagined when we chose the date. Standing in the bridal suite of Riverside Park's Garden Pavilion, I watched through the window as guests filtered in, fewer than originally planned, but every face that appeared was someone who had chosen me over Nicole's manipulation. You look stunning, said my best friend Tara, adjusting my veil. James is going to lose his mind when he sees you. I smoothed the silk of my dress, grateful that at least one thing had gone according to plan. Any sign of Mom? Tara's hesitation told me everything. Not yet, but there's still time. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Mom had been straddling the fence for weeks, promising to attend both events somehow, though Nicole's baby shower, deliberately scheduled to start 2 hours before my ceremony, made that virtually impossible. Miss Carter? The wedding coordinator poked her head in. We have a situation. My heart sank. What now? Your sister is here. She set up her baby shower in the Henderson house next door. They've got balloons tied to the fence line marking your property boundary. The Henderson house, a historic home that shared the same gardens as our venue, separated only by a decorative iron fence. Of course, Nicole would choose the closest possible location, ensuring maximum disruption. There's more, the coordinator added apologetically. Several of your guests have. Well, they've stopped by her event first. Some haven't continued on to yours. A hot wave of anger washed over me, but beneath it was something else, a strange, steely calm. This was exactly what I'd expected Nicole to do. She was nothing if not predictable in her need to overshadow me. Thank you for letting me know, I said. Please proceed as planned. When the coordinator left, Tara turned to me, eyes wide. That absolute witch. She really did it. How are you so calm right now? I opened my clutch purse and removed a folded document, a copy of the Real will, with certain sections highlighted. Because sometimes, I said, the universe has a way of delivering perfect timing. The ceremony was beautiful despite everything. James's eyes filled with tears when I walked down the aisle, escorted by his father, since my mother was conspicuously absent. We exchanged vows under an arch of cherry blossoms, promising to stand by each other through whatever life might bring, a commitment that felt especially meaningful given the circumstances. From the corner of my eye, I could see the Henderson house across the garden. Blue balloons floated above its roof, and occasional bursts of laughter drifted over the fence. I refused to let it distract me from the moment I was creating with the man I loved. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the reception pavilion, I spotted a familiar figure hurrying across the lawn, Mom, looking flustered in a pale blue dress, a gift bag still in her hand. Sophia, she breathed, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of Nicole's signature perfume. The ceremony was beautiful. I'm so sorry I missed most of it. The shower ran long, and Nicole needed help with the games and... It's okay, Mom, I interrupted. You're here now. That's what matters. Behind her, I noticed other family members slipping into the reception, my Aunt Madeline, Cousin Trevor, even Uncle Robert. all carrying the same blue gift bags, all looking slightly guilty as they took their seats at half-empty tables. Nicole had overplayed her hand. In her eagerness to steal my day, she'd scheduled her shower to overlap but end earlier, inadvertently freeing everyone to attend at least part of my reception. The DJ announced our entrance as husband and wife, and James and I danced our first dance to the song his parents had danced to at their wedding 40 years earlier. As the song ended, he squeezed my hand. "Now," he whispered. He was the only one I'd told about my plan. I nodded and moved toward the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," I began, scanning the room. More guests had arrived, filling in empty seats. In the back, the door opened again, and there stood Nicole, her baby bump prominently displayed in a tight blue dress, her husband Derek trailing behind her with a smug expression. Perfect timing indeed. "Many of you had to make a difficult choice today," I continued, "and I appreciate that you're here, even if only for part of our celebration. Family is complicated, but it's also precious, something my father understood better than anyone." I paused, allowing my gaze to find Nicole's. Her expression was triumphant, clearly believing her plan had worked. She'd forced the family to choose, disrupted my wedding, and still managed to make an entrance that turned heads. Dad always said that character reveals itself in how we treat others, especially in difficult times. He valued honesty, integrity, and genuine love above all else. I reached into my dress pocket and withdrew the folded document. Before he died, my father shared something with me in confidence. Something I've kept to myself until today. The room went still. Even Nicole looked curious now, edging closer. Nicole has led everyone to believe she controls our father's estate through the family trust. She's used that perceived power to manipulate, threaten, and divide our family, even going so far as to try to force me to cancel my wedding by scheduling her baby shower for the same day. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nicole's face flushed crimson. "What my sister didn't know," I continued, unfolding the paper, "is that Dad rewrote his will shortly before he passed. The family trust she manages? It's only 18% of his assets." I held up the document. The remaining 82% transfers to me. Today, upon my marriage to James, a man Dad described as having good character and genuine intention. Nicole's face turned ghost white. The glass of champagne she'd grabbed from a passing waiter slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. "That's a lie," she hissed, but the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. "Ask Harold Berkman," I replied steadily. "Dad's attorney. He's actually here today at my table." The elderly lawyer stood up and gave a small, professional nod. The guests gasped. Then, starting from one table and spreading to another, they began to applaud, not just for the revelation, but for the look of perfect shock on Nicole's face as her carefully constructed power play crumbled around her. In that moment, as Nicole stood frozen in disbelief, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure, just a sense of justice finally being served, and the weight of years spent in her shadow finally lifting from my shoulders. The days following my wedding unfolded like the aftermath of a storm, the air charged but clearer somehow, debris scattered but ready to be cleared away. James and I postponed our honeymoon, both sensing that the family situation needed attention before we could truly celebrate our new beginning. Nicole didn't go down without a fight. 3 days after the wedding, she called an emergency family meeting at her house. I arrived with a portfolio from Harold Berkman containing all the legal documentation, prepared for whatever narrative she might spin. "I'm sure you all heard Sophia's outrageous claims at her wedding," Nicole began, her voice steady despite the dark circles under her eyes. Her hand rested protectively over her baby bump, leveraging her pregnancy as a shield against criticism, a tactic she'd perfected over months. "I wanted to clear things up," she continued, addressing our assembled relatives. "There's been a misunderstanding about Dad's estate." Uncle Robert, who had worked with Dad for years at the family construction business, leaned forward. "What kind of misunderstanding, Nicole?" "It seemed pretty clear from the documents Sophia showed us." Nicole's smile tightened. "Those documents were incomplete. Dad made arrangements with me personally that supersede any outdated paperwork. That's not how legal wills work, I said quietly. Family arrangements sometimes transcend legal documents, Nicole countered. Dad told me specifically that he wanted me to manage everything because of my business background. Sophia's interpretation is misguided. To my surprise, Aunt Madeline spoke up. Robert always said Sophia had the better head for money, though. Remember how he used to joke that Nicole could earn it, but Sophia knew how to grow it? A flash of fury crossed Nicole's face before she composed herself. I'm just trying to clarify what Dad actually intended. He wouldn't have wanted the family divided like this. You're right about that. I agreed, opening the portfolio, which is why I've asked Harold to prepare these documents. I handed copies to everyone present, a comprehensive breakdown of Dad's estate and his explicit instructions regarding its distribution. I'm not contesting any portion allocated to the family trust that Nicole manages, I explained. That money is hers to administer, as Dad wished. But I won't allow her to continue misrepresenting the full extent of the estate or threatening to cut me out of what Dad specifically left for me. Our mother, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. Nicole, did you really threaten to disinherit your sister if she didn't postpone her wedding for your baby shower? Nicole's composure cracked. I was trying to protect our family traditions. The first grandchild deserves proper celebration, and Sophia was being selfish. By getting married? Mom interrupted. How exactly is that selfish? The room fell silent as the question hung in the air. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Nicole had no ready answer, no persuasive spin to apply. In the weeks that followed, Nicole made several attempts to clarify her actions. She sent lengthy emails explaining her genuine concern about wedding timing. She cornered relatives individually, trying to reframe her behavior as misunderstood protectiveness rather than manipulation. She even stopped by my new apartment with Derek, bearing an expensive wedding gift and a rehearsed apology that never once included the words, "I'm sorry." But the damage was done. The family had seen beneath her carefully constructed facade, and one by one, they stepped back from her influence. By the time Nicole's actual baby shower rolled around, rescheduled for a weekend in May, the guest list had dwindled significantly. Mom sent me a photo from the event. Nicole sitting amid blue decorations and wrapped gifts, her smile strained, the room noticeably empty. Derek stood awkwardly in the background, checking his watch. Only 8 people showed up, Mom texted. She's devastated but pretending everything's fine. I felt no satisfaction in her isolation, only a quiet sadness for what might have been if she'd chosen connection over control. 3 months after the wedding, Mom's lease came up for renewal. With part of my inheritance, I helped her find a small house just 10 minutes from James and me, close enough for frequent visits, but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. Your father would be proud of how you handled everything, she told me as we unpacked boxes in her new kitchen. He always said you had both his backbone and his heart. What about Nicole? I asked, curious if Mom had maintained contact. Mom sighed. She's not returning my calls since I moved closer to you. The baby's due next month, and I'm not even sure she'll let me know when it happens. In the end, Nicole's manipulations had cost her the very thing she'd fought so desperately to control, her position at the center of our family. The baby shower she'd used as a weapon against me had become prophetic in an unexpected way. She'd ended up exactly as the event had been. An empty room, a cold cake, and no one left to manipulate. I sent a gift when baby Thomas was born, a handmade quilt, and a trust fund for his education that Nicole couldn't touch. Not out of spite, but because that's what Dad would have done. Protected the innocent while holding the guilty accountable. James found me on our porch swing the evening after we heard of Thomas's birth, staring at old family photos. Regrets? He asked softly, settling beside me. I shook my head. I never wanted revenge. Just peace. And now, I leaned against his shoulder, watching the sunset paint our neighborhood in golden light. Now we build something better. Something true. Nicole had tried to steal my wedding day, threatening everything I valued in the process. But in her desperate grab for control, She'd lost the only thing that really mattered, the genuine love and trust of her family. No inheritance, no matter how substantial, could ever replace that. Some victories come with celebration and applause. Others, like mine, come with the quiet knowledge that the truth, once revealed, creates its own kind of justice, one that can't be manipulated, controlled, or stolen, even by the most toxic of sisters.